Many centuries ago, in the land of Canaan, there lived a giant called Reprobus, who was over 2 meters tall. Reprobus was fearsome with a wicked character. He only respected strength, and therefore only wished to serve the most powerful king in the world. Reprobus entered into the service of the Canaanite king. After a while, he began to press the king to find out if there was any king more powerful than him. The Canaanite king, fearing that he would lose the service of his giant, told Reprobus that there was not. One day, Reprobus was guarding the king at a feast. During the celebrations, a minstrel began to sing a song. The king, being a Christian, made the sign of the cross when the devil's name was mentioned in the song. Reprobus realized that the king was frightened of the devil, and therefore the devil must be more powerful than the king. Reprobus immediately left the king's service and went looking for the devil to offer him his services. After searching far and wide, Reprobus came across a band of marauders. He asked them if they knew where he could find the devil. The leader of the marauders told Reprobus that he was the devil. Reprobus immediately offered his services to the devil, and the devil, happy to have a giant in his service, accepted. After a time in the devil's service, Reprobus asked him if there was a king more powerful than him. The devil, not wanting to lose the service of the giant, changed the subject. However, one day, the band of marauders were marching along the road when they came across a roadside cross. The devil, seeing the cross and being full of fear, immediately turned around and walked quickly in the other direction. Reprobus saw how the devil reacted when he saw the cross, and Reprobus grew suspicious. He confronted the devil and threatened to leave his service if he did not tell him why he was afraid. The devil told Reprobus that it was he nailed to the cross, the Christ. It was he that the devil feared. Reprobus, realizing that Christ was more powerful than the devil, immediately left the devil's service and went looking for Christ. Reprobus looked far and wide, asking where he could find Christ. Then one day he came across a hermit. The hermit told Reprobus that he was a servant of Christ. Reprobus immediately asked how he too could enter into Christ's service. The hermit told Reprobus that a servant of Christ fasted regularly. Reprobus replied that he could not do this, and if there was not another way to serve Christ. The hermit then told Reprobus that he must pray regularly in order to serve Christ. Once again, Reprobus said he could not do this. Was there not another way to serve? The hermit frowned while he thought. He then pointed to a nearby river. He told the giant that he was a very large fellow, and that he needed to carry across anyone who wished to cross the river free of charge. Through this act of charity, he would be a servant of Christ. Reprobus carried out this service for many days. Then one night, he lay sleeping in his little hut by the river. He was awoken by a child's voice asking to be carried across the river. Reprobus found a little boy outside the hut. He immediately obeyed the hermit's instructions, took his staff, and put the child on his shoulders before beginning to cross the river. Halfway across the river, Reprobus felt the child grow very heavy. He grew so heavy, in fact, that Reprobus could barely move, but he eventually managed to cross the river and place the child on the other bank. The child told Reprobus that he had carried he who had created the entire world across the river on his shoulders, for he was the one that Reprobus sought. He was the Christ. The Christ child told Reprobus to cross back across the river and to plant his staff in the bank. In the morning it would be laden with fruit and flowers. Reprobus did as he was instructed by Christ, and the next morning everything occurred as Christ said it would. Reprobus went to the hermit and told him what happened. The hermit told Reprobus that he was now a true servant of Christ and baptized him. Reprobus was renamed Christ-bearer or Christopher after his deed. Christopher then set out into the world, determined to carry Christ with him wherever he went. He came across a city in Lycia called Samos. Christopher did not know the local language, but offered a prayer and was then able to understand the language. He went into the local circus, where the Christians were being tortured by the Romans. Christopher began to speak words of comfort to the Christians, but one of the soldiers hit Christopher in the face. Christopher said that if he was not a Christian, he would return the blow, but instead he planted his staff in the ground and prayed that the people would be converted. God made it so. 8,000 people immediately gave their lives over to Christ. After this miracle, Christopher was brought before the local king. Christopher told the king that he was called Christ-bearer. The king scoffed at the name and offered Christopher great rewards if he renounced Christ and offered sacrifice to demons. Christopher refused, and the king had him thrown in prison. After this, the king sent two beautiful young women called Nicaea and Aquilina to Christopher's cell. The king promised the women great reward if they made Christopher sin with them. When the women tried to tempt him, Christopher rebuked them. The two women's hearts were immediately filled with regret. They begged for forgiveness and asked Christopher to pray that God may strengthen their faith. The king was furious when he learned of the women's conversion. He had the two women executed after they refused to worship the pagan gods. The king then had Christopher brought before him and had him tortured. He then tried to have Christopher killed by arrows. God decided to preserve Christopher's life, and the arrows bounced off him. One of the arrows hit the king in his eyes, robbing him of his sight. Christopher looked at the blind king and told him that he would make him believe. Christopher told the king that he knew that the king would have him executed, but after he was executed, the king should rub Christopher's blood into his eyes. The king then had Christopher beheaded, but he did as he was told by Christopher and rubbed his blood into his eyes. The king's sight was immediately restored, and the king believed. He was baptized and ordered that the names of God and Christopher should be honoured by all in the city.